I love the bass line, just letting that play for a bit. Kia ora iwi, and welcome to Context with me, Guyon Espiner.
Kia ora, and it's me, Corin, Dann. Context, of course, is the backstory to the front page story where we look back at political history and try and make sense of it all.
And there's a catch, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, and that is only one of us knows the topic that we are going to talk about.
Yes, indeed. So I have come completely unprepared.
That's your
you're going to lay it on me.
I am, that's right. That's your best. Hey, look, I'm going to keep you in suspense just for a little bit longer and play this montage to set up our show today.
It is in fact the very first time in New Zealand's MMP history that we have had a three-party coalition government.
Well, that is not the government's position. The government's position is articulated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. That's the agreed situation. And for the second time, someone is talking out of his field.
It is fair to say that of the three partners in the coalition, there were some who started with divergent views.
All three political parties have their coalition agreements met. We just have one serious tiny little bit where we have disagreed.
I know he's the Prime Minister. I made him the Prime Minister.
You know, our coalition is very robust. We work together on a whole lot of issues. This is one where there's some disagreement.
Well, I've set it up as a coalition government, and you hear my language is always about a coalition government.
Yes, well, three parties and three little letters with a huge impact on our daily politics and our daily lives, MMP. All right, so that's a sense of some of the difficulty, right, Corin, with trying to wrangle a three-headed coalition.
Yeah, and we're supposedly in the easy bit, right, of, you know, when you think this is the middle of the term, you imagine where these parties, and we've seen this in the past, they suddenly get towards an election and they're like, whoa, how do we differentiate ourselves? It's been an extraordinary term, I think, in terms of MMP, the three parties and the two minor parties having so much influence, having so much sway over things.
Exactly. And it's not only an issue on the right where the government is trying to manage this, but of course it's also an issue for the left with the three parties trying to maintain what an alternative government might look like. For them, it's just as challenging.
I've said that Takuta Where's comments last week are totally unacceptable. If they reflect the views of the Māori Party, that would make it very, very difficult for Labour to work with the Māori Party. I've received an assurance from their leadership that his comments do not reflect their views. So that ball really now sits in their court. But I will not tolerate that kind of language in any government that I lead. And
Corin, just for the uninitiated, what do you think he's talking about there?
Yeah, he's talking about Takuta Where's comments that basically non-Māori shouldn't be able to campaign for Māori and Māori electorate seats, which of course drew huge criticism. Willie Jackson just straight out called it racist, didn't he? But I think Chris Hipkins was a little bit more restrained, but it's certainly caused quite a problem there on the left.
Yeah, exactly. So today's mission for Context, how did we get MMP, and is this the way that it's supposed to work? Now, before we dive into the history, Corin, I'd be interested in your take on this. It's going to be fun, isn't it?
This is going to be good.
Yeah, because you've got this kind of Cold War standoff, if you like. So you got teams on both sides of National New Zealand First and ACT versus Labour, Green and Pāti Māori. I mean, it feels very rigid. Is this the kind of MMP consensus that we were promised?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I suppose I'm thinking back to when we initially kicked off with MMP. There was the alliance. There were a lot of parties. It seemed to me there was New Labour, there was the Democrats, there was all these there was Social Credit was still in the mix. There was and then they kind of formed around the alliance, didn't they? And the alliance actually got a huge vote at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, and we're going to crack into quite a lot of that.
So
that's interesting.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I suppose. I think it's fluid. It keeps changing. I mean, we've seen it evolve and all the different ways in which they team up.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to unpack quite a lot of that, and Social Credit and the Alliance might get a bit of a look in. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not going to give away too much at this point, Corin. But let's get back into how we ended up with this system, right? Now, we had first past the post from the very first election that New Zealand had, 1853 it was, I looked that up, right through until 1996. So, and it occurred to me quite late in prepping for this that no one under 45 would have voted in a first past the post election. So, Corin, I think you're outside that zone. You probably did vote in a first past the post election. Just quickly for people, how did first past the post work, just for the people who don't know?
Yeah, well, I mean, people will be familiar that they vote for their local electorate MP. That was all there was. That made up every single MP in Parliament. You voted for your local MP. Whoever won the most seats got the goodies.
That's
and so,
right, yep.
Of course, that led to all sorts of allegations of when you're drawing up the electoral boundaries of gerrymandering and all this sort of stuff because it was so much more important.
Yeah.
And you know.
Yeah, and just a quick note for listeners too, obviously that was a 99-seat Parliament, wasn't it? And we roughly have 120 under MMP, can be a little higher, depending on the overhang and other sort of technicalities, but it was a 99-seat Parliament, and as you say, it was the first to 50, wasn't it? Yeah, first to 50.
Yes, and only half the MPs now are electorate MPs, and the other half. What is it? Well, it depends on the share of the vote and all that sort of stuff, doesn't it? So
yeah, and we'll get into some of that. But it's roughly, if you look at it, and we said the first MMP election was 1996. It was roughly a 10-year kind of journey on to MMP, if you like. And in 1986, there was a Royal Commission on the electoral system, and that was under the Labour government of the time. And it recommended that New Zealand adopt MMP. A couple of other interesting things about that. I don't know if you remember this, Corin, but they actually said we should abolish the Māori seats. They said that they wouldn't be needed under MMP. And they recommended a 4% threshold in terms of the number of party votes that you would need to get into Parliament. And just as
that is interesting.
Yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
right. So, because just as a quick primer for people, what are the two ways, Corin, of getting into Parliament under MMP?
Yeah, well, you've got at the moment you've got to clear your 5% hurdle. Yep. Which has proved difficult for a lot of minor parties, and if it was set at 4, you probably would have seen quite a different range, maybe a Christian party or something like that may well have got into Parliament. The other way is if you can win one electorate seat and you get 2 or 3% of the vote, you don't get the 5, you will be allocated seats on the basis of how many extra percent you get, and it might be 1, 2 or 3 extra. So that's why you do see Epsom, there's been various electorates around the traps where people have targeted that.
And they call it coattailing, don't they?
Yeah. There's probably other worse names for it than that. I mean, was it Paddy or you used to call it dirty deals?
Yeah, I don't think David Seymour ever called it coattailing. No. It's slightly pejorative, but we get what you mean. Okay, so the Royal Commission recommends that we adopt MMP. But of course, Royal Commissions aren't binding, so it could have stopped there. And when you think about it, that would have been the most likely option because the major parties were in power. And again, can you explain to people why first past the post creates sort of a duopoly and it really favours the two big major parties? Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is one of my most earliest memories was vaguely of the 1981 election. I would have been pretty young, but I remember it was one of those cases where Labour was complaining. I don't know why, but they felt they had more votes, but they still lost. And
You're absolutely right, actually. Yeah. Yep, that is true. And
that situation. But I suppose the other thing is that you get incumbents in electorate seats and they're very difficult to move, and so it's pretty hard for a newcomer to come in to the electorate in that local environment and knock someone out if they're a strong candidate who's been there for a while and has got the full weight of the party behind them. I mean, then you have the rural areas and city areas, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I kind of had a similar sentiment, and it is roughly right. I didn't realise it was actually a political science term for this. They call it Duverger's law. It's a French this I'm going to dive deep into the Geeksville here.
Yeah, this is good.
There's a French sociologist called Maurice Duverger, and he wrote this paper in the 50s and 60s. And the idea is that if you're going in and you're looking at the ballot box and you really like, say, Party Yellow and whoever the person who's standing for that, but you think, he's not going to win, there's no chance of him winning, then you go for one of the two major ones who has a likely chance of winning, because you don't want to waste your vote. So you see this in Britain, and you certainly see it in America, where what do they have? 330 million people, two parties, really. And so you get the situation where if you think that the vote's going to be wasted, you go for one of the two major ones who you think may have a chance to win. And it all sort of, the constellation is all around those two people. So
interesting.
Anyway, so if you want to impress your friends at a I don't know.
Here's a question for you then.
Yeah.
Did the the Royal Commission of Inquiry recommend any other systems like that? Because there are other systems, STV and the Australian system and etc., that try and compensate for that.
Well, absolutely. And they recommended that we go for MMP, but they did look in some depth at those other systems, and we'll talk briefly about that in a second. But just to pick up the narrative here, so you've got the 1986 Royal Commission, they recommend MMP. The politicians aren't so keen on it. Labor and National didn't want it because, they were doing very well under the first past the post system. But in a leaders' debate in the run-up to the 1987 election, this happened.
Aspects of unfairness, which is why this government supported the move to have the Royal Commission, and we will, in the next term, refer that report to a parliamentary select committee. A referendum will thereafter be held. I believe that there will probably be a public acceptance of 4-year term and a modified form of proportional representation. But everyone will have practically a very substantial opportunity to consult. I think the German one is an example of it. I think other forms of proportional representation, you can have not just the tail wagging the dog, but the flea wagging the tail, and that would be crazy.
That's the inimitable David Lange.
That's interesting. I didn't know that he had pushed that.
Well, you see, there's a fascinating backstory to this, Corin. So that's the 1987 leaders' debate, and David Lange misread his notes and promised a referendum, and the Labour Party guys are watching this going, my God, what has he done? He's promised a referendum on the electoral system, and that was a mistake. So that's a lovely...
Well, that is interesting, because those leaders reminds you of those how critical those leaders' debates can be, because leaders can go rogue. They're in the moment. They're under the lights. It's like they're fighting for their life.
Absolutely.
Who knows what they're going to promise?
Don't you reckon? I reckon that's a nice little quick sidebar. Paddy Gower had a great...
He got one out of...
He had a great run in 2017 where he got Jacinda Ardern to commit to abortion review. And
That's right.
And he sort of got an auction trade-off over child poverty reduction targets between Bill English and Jacinda Ardern. Do you remember that?
It's a good little lesson for hosts of the debate. Get some stuff on the table there.
It really is. And so, so you get that. It didn't happen in the 87 to 90 term. Labor wins the election, but this referendum that was promised didn't actually happen. But Bolger gets in 1990 as the national government, and they do go ahead with this. And you have another big plank in this story, which is a 1992 referendum that was held into the electoral system. So that was the first plank of this. And as you mentioned, a couple of these systems, so they had a vote, do you want to change it? And you had, if you did want to change it, you could choose between MMP, preferential voting, single transferable vote, or STV, and supplementary member, none of which we're going to go into today.
No, they're way too complicated.
So we're not going to get into that. But
God, it took me so long to work out the Australian system when I was over there, and I think I've forgotten it already.
I remember too. I covered a couple of those elections, including Kevin 07, when Kevin Rudd came in 2007, and I remembered it and I've forgotten it. But anyway, there was a 1992 referendum. Here's how it played out.
Good morning, I'm Paul Henry. It's 6 o'clock. A landslide vote for change. Yesterday's historic electoral referendum has resulted in an overwhelming demand for a change to the way we elect our MPs. Anna Thomas has details.
Of the votes counted minus the specials, a massive 84% of voters have called for change to the way we elect our MPs. Predictably, the preferred option is MMP, mixed member proportional. That came through with 70% support. In second place, trailing well behind, is the STV option on just 17%. The other two options kept in the single figures. It's interesting to note all 97 electorates have voted overwhelmingly for change and in favour of MMP.
So it was a hiding. 85% voted for change and 70% wanted to be MMP. Interesting newsreader there. You worked with Paul Henry, didn't you, back in the day?
Yes, I did work with Paul Henry. I was
TV,
I was the business guy across the studio from him. He was quite an interesting guy to work with. The first time my first ever day on television, like I'd never done TV before. I came from RNZ as economics correspondent, went up there, and I had a week to prepare. Did my business show from 6 till 6:30, and then I had to come back for a business update. And I'd never been. That's the first time I've ever been live on TV. And he says, here's Corin Dann with the business. And the first thing he said to me was, what's your favourite rodent? Straight off the bat. Straight off the bat. No warning, no prep, no nothing.
That's
and I
brilliant.
And I came out with hamster, though. I got hamster.
Oh, that's not
and he
bad.
was like, he looked happy enough with that, and then he left. And he was nice to me from then on.
That's classic. I was going to say, whether you, as they say in politics, you have to swallow a dead rat.
Well,
But
the thing
there
with
a
Paul
hamster.
was he wanted to test you out. That was his thing. He liked to test people on air, see what they were made of, and if you couldn't hack it, he wasn't too sympathetic. But he seemed to be pretty good after that.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so wow, I mean, that's a massive landslide when you think, and I'll repeat that number again, 85% saying, nah, we don't like the electoral system.
Was there a massive campaign? I'm having these mememories coming to my head of these sort of like
the campaign.
campaigns
That's
and stuff.
the next bit. That's the next bit when they get to the next. So this is the first step, and then you go to the referendum that we had in '93, and we'll talk about this in a second.
I see.
But yeah, so it's a two-stager. So you had the 1992 referendum saying, hey, do you want to change the system? And if so, what would you go for? And then they said, yep, we want to change.
It's coming back. No, it's coming back.
We want to go for MMP. And then they ran off MMP against the current FPP system.
That's right.
But just before we get to that, though, think about the dates, 1992. Why do you reckon people were so dark on politicians and the government at that point?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons, but I think that a key one was they felt that the politicians had not been doing what they said they were going to do. Yep. They had not been delivering on. They'd been breaking promises. Yep. And they felt that they did not have control over the politicians because we've got this incredible system where there's so much power. And if you're a first past the post government, the executive is so powerful, and I think it was voters saying, we're not happy with this, we want some checks and balances because you guys haven't been doing what you said you're going to do.
That's pretty much bang on, I think. So we get to this 1993 referendum we've been talking about, and it's fierce. This campaign is fierce. Here's one of the ads that ran by a group that was the anti-MMP campaign, and they were called the Campaign for Better Government.
21 extra MPs will cost us millions of dollars every year. Enough is enough. Tick the top box. Reject MMP.
So that's the anti-MMP campaign, and here's my first pop quiz thing for you in a way. Can you name the man who fronted the anti-MMP campaign?
I feel like he's in the... something came into my head and I feel like I should know who
Business
it is.
guy, was the chair of Telecom at the time.
Was it Rod Dean?
No, close. Peter Shirtcliffe. He's probably
Peter
not as well
Shirtcliffe,
remembered as Rod Dean. Who
No, the name is... I remember the name now. It was something there.
Yeah, Peter Shirtcliffe and this Campaign for Better Government, they had heaps of cash. Business Roundtable was in there. They've fallen away, but they were in there. They were spending up big time. In fact, they had the notes here, $500,000 on TV ads in the last week of the campaign. And remember, this is 93 money, so it's a lot of cash. Then you had the pro-MMP side. They called themselves the Electoral Reform Coalition, and their group included this guy.
What we're wanting is a system where every vote counts equally and that pressure groups can't go and tap on the shoulder of their favourite cabinet minister and get what they want. And that's what they stand to lose with MMP.
But what's fairer and simpler than one person, one vote?
What is fairer and simpler is one person with a vote that counts no matter where they live, and parties getting seats in Parliament in proportion to their level of support throughout the community. That's the difference.
Do you recognise that voice?
Is that Rod Donald?
Yes, it is. Bang on, bang on.
Oh, what a legend.
Yeah.
Do you know, I once went and interviewed Rod Donald when I was a student journalist. I went to his house in Waltham, and I got there, and he was wearing the phone, a handheld phone around his head with a strap around his head, putting washing on the line. He literally, and it was the cliched moment. He was a lovely guy.
Yeah, it's interesting you say
Died
that.
far too soon.
Yeah, he was 46. It's 2005. I still remember that day. And I have fond memories of him too. When I first came into the press gallery, he'd come around really early in the morning, and I was, 27, and a very young 27. I was working for the Evening Post. This would have been 1998, and he'd come round and he put ideas like, he'd introduce ideas, and he'd say, "Oh, why do you think an oil spill contributes to GDP?" And as a young kind of kid, you'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he was he loved ideas, and he was a really interesting guy. Hey, here's a trick question for you. Under what party did Rod Donald enter Parliament? And it is a bit of a trick question.
Values?
No. Values had started in 1972 and never made it into Parliament. I'll give it one more shot.
If it wasn't the Values, he wasn't New Labour, so...
It was part of the so he's a Green MP in the end, but they came in 1996.
So there was a bunch of parties in the alliance, wasn't there? So
there was, and the Greens were one of them, and then he ended
Yes.
up as a Green MP, but he started out in the alliance.
I see.
Anyway, look, this was a very intense campaign. In the end, 54% to MMP, 46% to first past the post, right? So it's a pretty substantial win for MMP, right? And so then we get on the track to the first MMP election, which was 1996. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the context, and you did touch on it with your perfect memory about 1978, about this idea that was deemed unfair. Because I'm looking today also at why. Why did we go for MMP? And you're right that in 1978 and indeed in 1981, Labour won more votes than National, but they lost the election because of MMP. So I'll just give some stats here. 1978, Labour got 40.4%. This is under FPP, first past the post, sorry, of the vote to National's 39.8, but National won 51 seats to Labour's 40. Same in 81. Labour gets 39% of the vote, National gets 38.8, so it's really, really neck and neck, but National got 47 to Labour's 43. So, again, Corin, what is it about FPP that, or first past the post, that allows you to lose the popular vote? We see this in America too, don't we? You lose the popular vote. I know it's slightly different with the Electoral College, but you lose the popular vote, but you can form government.
Well, I mean, part of it is the boundaries and the electorates, presumably. But again, coming back to that earlier point about, I just still think it's... If you've got incumbent MPs in safe seats, they are very hard to overturn. I don't know what I would put it down to exactly, but you're going to see a lot of wasted vote, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because those two people, someone can win that electorate with a bare majority, and a whole lot of other people who got voted for, it counts for nothing.
Absolutely. And
that's wasted.
And you mentioned social credit here. So I'm going to have a quick look at them, just as a sort of a tangent look, because they are pretty interesting. What do you remember about social credit and even the idea? Because I went back and had a look at social credit.
That effectively means the government controls the money supply.
Yes.
So you don't have an independent reserve bank. It's like COVID, but permanently. Where you're just printing money. Where you basically go to the central bank and say, print us we'll borrow as much money as we can off you, and we'll pay it back whenever. It's like you don't have to, you somehow and mop it up again. But So it was
exactly.
that. That's literally what they wanted, wasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. And just, I mean, me and Corin get excited about this because we're geeks, but just in terms of, get us on
They
politics.
won a seat, though, didn't they? They won a seat somewhere.
They won two, brother.
Two.
And we'll talk a little bit about that. But so they were denigrated as the funny money kind of party.
Yeah.
But for the uninitiated, this is the third biggest party in New Zealand from the 50s to the 80s. And again, a couple of quick stats for you, right? Just to show how first past the post totally is a graveyard for smaller parties. Couple of stats. 1954, social credit, 11% of the vote, no seats. 1966, 14% of the vote, 1 seat. They peaked in 1981 with 20% of the vote. Now, that would give you about 24 seats in an MMP parliament. They won 2 seats. So, again, that number, 1981, 20% of the vote, just 2 seats.
I mean, that's ACT and New Zealand First combined right now, isn't
Bang
it?
on.
You know?
Yeah, and more than that. That's
I know.
right.
And you think of the influence they would then have.
It's
or
Nationals'
deservedly have.
Nationals result in 2002 under Bill English.
That's incredible.
So here's another quick pop quizzer for you. Can you name either of those two MPs? Okay.
Yep. Gary Knapp and Bruce Beetham.
Oh, bang on. You got me. Yep. Absolutely.
I've always been slightly weirdly fascinated by it because I remember when I first, it's like you have that revelation, you're like, did they really think that about the money supply? Was that the main thing? And it was. But they must have been quite charismatic politicians as well, I think. And I have vague memories of them being reasonably, probably pretty good politicians.
Yes. That's right. Okay, so back to the sort of narrative. So you've got so if you had the referendum, New Zealanders said, "Yep, we want MMP." So 1996 is the first election under MMP. So it's roughly 30 years. Will be next year, won't it? It'll be 30 years exactly. So in the campaign, obviously New Zealand is a little bit confused about MMP. How does the situation work? And there was a public ad campaign to promote knowledge of it.
Tell you what, Cooch, why don't we just pack this in and become MPs?
Well, there are 2 ways a party can get into Parliament, but they're not that easy.
Are they?
No. On one hand, your party would have to win at least 5% of all the party votes cast in the election, or on the other hand, you'd have to win at least 1 local electorate seat.
It's easy as falling off a log.
So that was playing off a well-known cartoon figure. Any guesses? Who
That'll
that
be,
cartoon was
I presume it's Wol Footrot, is it?
Footrot Flats, absolutely.
Well, you couldn't get much bigger than Footrot Flats back then, could you really?
I was actually thinking about this too. I was thinking, it's interesting, because you know how they have to go to immense lengths to be sort of non-partisan and represent New Zealand. It's interesting. I don't know that we'd buy that now, would we? That we don't see ourselves, possibly all of us, as represented by a sort of rural farmer. But I don't know. Maybe that's a tangent. Maybe that's another podcast. Okay, so we are... First MMP election, Saturday, October 12. And this is a big deal for people because they are used to going to bed at night on election night and either the red team has won or the blue team has won. But this ain't the case. I went back, had a look at some clippings. Sunday Star Times, October 13, the headline. 2 a.m, Winston the Kingmaker. That's the headline, and he wore that like a tailored pinstripe for the next few decades, didn't he?
Sure has.
And the subheading, Clark relishes breaking glass ceiling. So tell me whether that played out and what they're getting at there.
Yeah. Was there this idea that he was going to go with Labour, that was where people thought it was going to head, and that because there'd been their falling out with Bolger and... Yeah. There was no way that it was going to be anything else other than that, and she was going to be the first female Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. What are your memories of that government? I mean, I came in, this is my start of my love affair with politics. I came into the press gallery in
I think I was on a little bit of a tangent with bands and because I actually remember, I do remember the long wait. So Winston kept the nation waiting. That's right. For how long?
8 weeks.
Was it 8 weeks or something?
He went fishing first up. Yeah, that's right.
He goes, that's right. Yeah. And he just, I suppose looking back, first one, trying to figure it out, you could give him the benefit of a doubt on that. But I was on a long surf trip around the North Island from memory.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Would always be checking in to find out about what was sort of vaguely happening, and it just went on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? How long what have we got now? It's sort of more like 3 or 4 weeks, and then they complain about the specials.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, we can't start until the specials are back.
That's right. Yeah, but it was
which I suppose is fair because they have actually been quite significant. One vote was almost the difference this time around.
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
it?
true.
One seat, that is.
That's true. So it was a pretty tumultuous government, that first MMP government, and it didn't last.
It is with regret and some sadness that I have to announce this afternoon that I have asked the Governor-General to dismiss the Right Honourable Winston Peters as Deputy Prime Minister and as Treasurer. I have made every attempt, I can assure you, to make contact with Mr Peters in the last hour.
He wasn't picking up
she
the
couldn't
call.
get hold of him.
That's Jenny Shipley. There's another clip which I didn't use, but he was at some gig in Auckland and he goes, I was told by so-and-so, some businessman, he was a stranger mystery. But anyway, for the uninitiated, it all blew up over the sale of Wellington Airport.
So hang on, let me just.
Yeah.
So did she sack him?
Oh, yeah, yep, sacked him as Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer. It was August of 1998, I remember it well. I tell you what, I mean, here's a little war story. I mean, I remember that incredibly well. I remember standing at the base of the beehive where those doors open up. I remember seeing the New Zealand First Cabinet Ministers ashen-faced walking out of Cabinet. It was historic. I mean, they walked out of Cabinet. It was all over. Peter McArdle and co, all those guys. And the press gallery itself was a war zone. Journos were drunk because it was 98. That's what journos did. I remember one journalist who I won't name literally bouncing off the walls of the press gallery.
Wow.
I remember Matthew Hooton coming around with a press release. He was working for Lockwood Smith and he was waving it, and they were all, extremely upset about Winston. And so it was absolute carnage because the first coalition government had blown up after just 18 months. So a good little segue to talk about coalition deals and how this works, because the modern agreements, they're sort of 8 pages long was the New Zealand First Labour one 2017. The 2023 agreement, New Zealand First National, that runs to 14 pages, but a lot of it's just sort of kind of waffle. I want you to take a guess how long that coalition agreement was, that the first one, the actual coalition agreement.
Well, I don't really know, but if it took 8 weeks, I'm guessing, and I'm guessing it must be dozens of pages.
Yeah, it was 73 pages long.
Yeah.
And I went back to look at it, and it nailed down everything. They nailed down weed and pest control. They tried to have a policy on how many maximum minutes of advertising could be screened on television. I mean, it was just tried to absolutely sort of nail absolutely everything down. And so they've changed a bit now, haven't they? Because
yes, I mean they are still quite detailed, aren't they? But they presumably they. Well, the one thing I would say about them is they do become like this doctrine, don't they? And if you and when we talk about that relationship between the three parties at the moment, it's like if it's not written down in the coalition agreement, then it's like you better make sure you've got your ducks in a row before you announce anything. Yeah. Because Labor got caught out by that.
Yes.
They announced the 3 strikes policy, and I think Winston was like, no, that's not in the agreement, and they had to backtrack on it.
Yeah, that's right. So it does, in some ways, sort of tie you down. It possibly makes governments a little less agile and flexible, doesn't it? So look, let's, in the last little segment of this, like 5, 6, 7 minutes or so that we'll spend on this, because as I say, 30 years will be, next election, 2026, and that'll be 30 years. So we kind of look a little bit on whether MMP has delivered on its promise. You'd have to say, wouldn't you, Corin, it's delivered on the diversity promise, right?
Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. I mean, you've just got, and there's just so many more women, so many more Māori ethnicities. You think how many Māori are now in Parliament, not just because of the Māori seats.
Look, here's some great stats. You'll be interested in this. You mentioned Māori. So in 1993, right, that was the last first past the post election, 8% of the MPs were Māori. In 2020, it was 21%. So you could argue over-representation. It's about 17% Māori, 21% of the Parliament. Women, 21% of MPs in the last FPP Parliament in 93, and we got close to 50% now. And here's just the last bit on that, which I find fascinating. 0 Asian MPs before MMP. and 18 since. So it really has made a massive difference.
And younger MPs. I mean, Winston brought in a guy who was it Craig McNair? He was like 20 or something. I mean, how old was he? And there was also Deborah
Morris. She was one of the youngest.
She was a
ministers.
cabinet minister.
Yeah, she was a minister, at least a minister. I'm not sure she was in cabinet. Might have been outside cabinet. That's an extra point for listeners. I think she was a minister outside cabinet. But anyway, so that's right. Youth, and also you've had openly gay MPs. You've had trans MPs. So really,
the other thing, Guyon, is it's enabled parties to bring in what you might call technocrats. People Don Brash was arguably. I mean, he came straight in. He wouldn't have won a seat, would he? In the old way, under the old ways. He might have even tried, actually. Did he way back in the day? I can't remember. But certainly it allowed parties, if they wanted a particular expert in an area, and I'm thinking, was Margaret Wilson one, perhaps one like that on Labour reform? She was Attorney General, and she was a big, absolutely. Yep. And so you could bring them in on the list.
Chris Finlayson was the same, and Tim Grosser. I remember Tim Grosser was horrified at the prospect he might even win an electorate seat. He confided in me once. I'm sure he won't mind me telling you.
Some people will like that and some won't. Because some people say you should be able to you should be getting elected. The people should elect you, and you should be able to. And then other people. Well, and then there's also arguments to say, well, you need people with expertise. So I can see both ways arguments.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, I'd forgotten until I researched this. We actually had another referendum in 2011 on MMP. I'd forgotten this.
Did we?
So, yeah, we did. Because Key had promised it, and we got one 58 to 42. So I suppose popularity of MMP had increased from.
Why he promised that? I can't even remember.
I don't know why that was done either. There was probably at times there was a bit of disgruntlement with MMP. It sort of does raise its head every now and again, and so there was a referendum in 2011 with that election, and 58 to 42. But just going to finish and to set this last little bit up. Let's have a listen to this because I want to riff and hear your thoughts on this quote.
It's about time a major party said no and sent the country back to the polls. It's about time a major party says we are not prepared to sell out what are our major platforms. We're not going to trade them off just for power. And I would have that plan B, in my back pocket at the start of the negotiations so that all of your media and comms is ready to go to say to the country, it's not us, we tried to be reasonable, but that guy there wants this and it's a step too far. So we're going back to the polls. And I tell you what, it'd straighten up MMP overnight.
Do you recognise that voice?
That'd be Tracy Martin.
Bang on,
Is it?
work.
Yeah,
Yes.
But I don't know from when, though.
No, pretty recent.
It was recently, was it?
Yeah, she was on with Wallace Chapman, RNZ, on the panel. And so it's in recent times.
Which is pretty interesting because she's a former New Zealand First MP basically saying don't let the tail wag the dog, so to speak.
Absolutely. And isn't that interesting? We played that clip from 87 with David Lange saying sometimes the flea wags the tail on the dog.
Yeah.
But isn't that interesting? And so I just want to finish with some of this because it just bring it right back full circle into the modern time. And you see, don't you, that I mean, you'd have to say that National's Christopher Luxon did give away quite a lot in those coalition negotiations. I'm thinking about things that he really wouldn't have wanted to do, like the Treaty Principles bill, and, which created a lot of, crowded out his agenda to some degree, and a lot of things that made it problematic for him. So, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how those negotiations take place.
It is, and in some ways it's his main card, isn't it, that he can play if he therefore really needs to get through to towards the end of next year without this thing busting up, because the one big card he can play is, look, I took the bigger position, and I've been the one to keep these guys difficult, strong personalities. I've kept it under control. I've given you stable government. I've shown that I can manage it. That's his trump card, because if the economy's not looking so good, he's not a particularly popular, he's not a great charismatic sort of leader, but if he can show that he has kept this thing together and people might understand that might be his biggest selling point. I don't know, but the question then is, we're already seeing it fraying a little bit. Come next year, Winston will be in full opposition mode, despite the fact he's in government. He's done it every time, and he's very good at it.
Exactly.
He somehow manages to make people think that he's in opposition when he's the guy in government. you know.
Yeah. So I guess just finally, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. How much of this is about maths? And I say that because when you have a major party leading a government that gets not a majority, but close to it, like that sort of mid-40s sort of position that John Key had. And then you get the sprinkling of MMP. So you might have Māori Party, United Future. You might have a memorandum of understanding with the Green Party, which Key had. So you get that. But you do still get a lucid, sort of coherent government vision.
Yes. You've got a bigger moral majority. You've got a bigger mandate, haven't you? You've just got when you're in the 40s, it's just that heft. And Ardern didn't quite make it in that first term, did she? She only had 37. She thought she was going to get more.
Yeah.
And English got 44% or something and couldn't form a government, which was extraordinary. So you're right. I think in the 40s you've got a lot more ability to be able to boss them around. And the other thing, Key was very good at having a couple of options on left. He had the Māori Party and he had, was it United Future as well, or ACT as well. So he could go, he could shop
left,
around.
right and centre. Yeah.
If he needed to get something through that might upset one, he knew that he had one of the other ones, which wasn't quite the situation here. I would just say finally, I'm still a supporter of MMP in the sense that I think that New Zealand's system is still. I guess I'm in the Geoffrey Palmer. It's a Geoffrey Palmer camp, unbridled. It's an incredibly powerful system for an executive government, and you think of the ability to use urgency and to do what you want. I think without a second chamber or some other checks and balances, MMPs, we keep coming back to this question, the best we've got.
That's right.
But it does slow things down.
Yeah.
It does slow things down, and I know that frustrates people because sometimes they want their agenda through, depending on which side of politics you're on. But slowing things down sometimes is necessary. And because you need to make good decisions, to be good governance, good decision making, and MMP does force negotiation. It does force people to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Has its moments, but
it's been fun talking to you today.
Been excellent. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, appreciate it. Great context.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
Nice one.
Thanks so much for listening. You can follow and listen to Context for free at rnz.co.nz or wherever it is in your life that you get your podcast from. You can watch the show too if you want to see what we're looking and laughing about. YouTube, just search for Context RNZ. And if there's something in the news that you want some context for, you can flick us an email, context@rnz.co.nz. Context is hosted by me, Guyon Espiner, and by Corin Dann. Producers Miranda Fisher and William Ray. Sound and video engineer is Corey Fuimao-Ono, and Zebediah Morrow is our Wellington studio operator. Our production coordinator is Brianna Juritich-Gregg, and the executive producer of Context is Tim Watkin.